Hi everyone, I'm Shelley and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and today's topic is giants after the flood. How? First off, I'm going to apologize. I'm having to do this without my mic because I went to kind of toss it behind my laptop and I accidentally dipped the tip of it into melted candle wax. So I'm afraid it's not going to work for the whole video. So I'm just going to do it without it. So I hope that you can hear me and that the echo isn't too bad, but I still wanted to get this done today. So I've actually talked about this before. The book of Genesis tells us that there are giants both before and after the flood. Genesis 6 verses 1 through 4 says, "And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth." I find it interesting that it says in the earth. "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown." So I want to focus right now on the part that says there were giants in the earth in those days and also after that, because that brings to mind a question. If there was a worldwide flood that wiped everything out, how could there have been giants after the flood? And we know for a fact that there were. We have stories of Goliath. We have stories of Og and Bashan. It mentions the Rephaim and the Anakim, the Zamzummim. I'm not sure if I said that right, but there are so many tribes of giants that are written about after the flood, and you have to stop and think, okay, how is this even possible? And this actually is something that I have touched on before. I explored the possibility that these giants may have gone underground during the flood. And I still think that that's a possibility, and it's actually one of the options that I'm going to be exploring with you today. But I actually came up with 5 more options besides that, and it doesn't even mean that those are all the only possibilities. I might have missed the actual reason that they were able to continue on after the flood. So I might be completely off. Or it could have been more than one of these ways that they were able to continue on after the flood. But I found it interesting enough to just kind of see what other ideas are out there, and, really to hear what you have to say in the comments too for how this could have been possible. The first idea that I'm going to explore is that the way that the Bible is written, it makes it seem like it was a worldwide flood. However, there are some scholars who believe that it may have been a localized flood. And when it says the world, it's referring to the world that was known at that time in history. I'm not really a proponent of that idea, but I thought that I would bring that to mind. But along with that, there is also the idea that there may have been portions of the earth in which there were some survivors. And some people have even referred to such things as pockets of survival. And that is a notion that I've thought about. Is there a way that there were people and giants and maybe other things that were somehow able to survive this worldwide flood? If that were the case, that would explain why there are so many flood, we'll call them myths. And when I say myths, I don't necessarily mean fictional. I think that there is much truth to be found in myths. And from what I've discovered about legomanism and talked about, I think in my fairy video, I think the same thing holds true for this. But there are so many stories of floods throughout the entire world. Now, right here is a list of flood myths. Now, not all of them are very similar to the biblical flood. However, there are enough of them that it makes you scratch your head and think to yourself, it certainly seems like these people are talking about the same one. I'll just click right here on one of them for now. I know that there are a few that I was not able to get to. Okay, this is one of them that was. For some reason, some of the links no longer work on that page. But anyway, the Choctaw Flood Myth. Our people have always had a tradition of the deluge, which happened in this way. There was total darkness for a great time over the whole of the earth. The Choctaw doctors or mystery men looked out for daylight for a long time, until at last they despaired of ever seeing it, and the whole nation was very unhappy. At last a light was discovered in the north, and there was great rejoicing, until it was found to be great mountains of water rolling on, which destroyed them all, except a few families who had expected it and built a great raft on which they were saved. And I'm sure that most of you have heard, where is it? Have heard the story of the Sumerian flood myth for sure. The Gilgamesh flood myth is very, very similar. Here it just says the Gilgamesh flood myth is a flood myth in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Many scholars believe that the flood myth was added to Tablet XI in the standard version. I will click on this. So here we have just a summary of the actual Epic of Gilgamesh flood story, and it involves the building and launching of a boat, and then a storm. That would be the flood. And this flood was said to have been sent by the Anunnaki gods. And on this boat, there were living survivors. Sounds a whole lot like the biblical flood, Noah's flood, we might call it. And I'll leave a link to this in the description box. But as you can see, there are so many stories of floods worldwide, and many of them, like the ancient Greek flood myths, very, very similar to the biblical flood. Dozens and dozens of them. I think at one point I've read that there were 200 stories worldwide that were similar to the biblical flood. So what this is telling me is that obviously something happened. But if it is telling it from different perspectives, there are two options that it could be. It could either be that the story was passed down, and then when everyone was dispersed at the Tower of Babel, they may have taken that story with them, and it may have, kind of been altered over time. Or it could just be that there were actual survivors from different nations. But again, really, as I'm thinking of it, it's if everyone was at the Tower of Babel and everyone was dispersed, then that is also a very likely way that the stories may have been changed a bit. But it's still interesting to think about. So the second option that I'm going to discuss today is the possibility of multiple incursions. So we know that the sons of God procreated with human women before the flood. Is it possible that it could have happened also after the flood? And maybe that is how there came to be giants. And the story of Sodom and Gomorrah actually does suggest that, because the men in Sodom were very interested in the angels, the men who were there. So is it something that they were already prone to doing? They just having relations with these angels? I have no idea. But I certainly do think that it's a possibility that it could have been multiple incursions. I do know that Rob Skiba was not a fan of the multiple incursion theory, simply because of Enoch 1, that talks about how great the punishment was and how it actually made the archangels tremble with fear when they saw what had happened to these watchers who were imprisoned for what they did with the human women. And so he said there's no way that other, watchers or, sons of God will come down and repeat that. But I also have to think to myself, if they have a nature at all like human beings, there are plenty of people who have hardened hearts on this earth and who are very callous, and they will still commit atrocities for which we know for a fact other people have been put to death for. yet they will still do it because they simply don't care. They don't have they don't care about the repercussions. There's just a callousness there. And the fact that if we're thinking of when God says in Genesis 1, I believe, let us make man in our image. And if we are thinking of us as being the divine council, and there would be the sons of God in there, us being made in our image, it makes me think that we are similar to these sons of God. And so it is possible that they might have the same temperament that sometimes humans do, unfortunately, and maybe, yeah, stupid enough to go back and repeat things that should have been terrifying for them to think about. The third option is the one that I tackled before, and that is the idea that these giants may have escaped to the underground to get away from the flood. They may have had some information from their fathers, from the watchers, and they may have known what it is that they needed to, be careful of. Now, I've got to say that when I mentioned this in my other video about them escaping underground, people have said to me, well, how would they have escaped? Like, wouldn't the floodwaters have gone underground also? If we think about DUMBs, the deep underground military bases, they are made specifically to keep that sort of thing out. And, there are a lot of people, myself included, who believe that those DUMBs were already there and we just kind of took them over and are now using them. Kind of like a lot of the architecture and a lot of the buildings that we claim for our own. I think that they were already there. So the idea that they may have been able to build something underground that would have kept them safe, to me, is not off the table, because let's not forget that another thing that the Watchers did was they gave forbidden information to the humans, and likely these giants probably had very high technology. They had fallen angel technology, and they certainly would have been able to create things that we would not have been able to, or that at this point in time we might think that could never happen. But I think that we underestimate the capabilities of the people during this time, because we have been programmed to look at antediluvian people as being dumb cavemen. And, not to mention that there are stories that just abound of giants coming out of the underground or coming out of caves. We have trolls that live inside mountains, which would certainly be another possibility. I have even read tales of Bigfoot that is thought to be living underground or in caves. And again, these are all possibilities. And I actually want to read to you about Darren Kuyu, and I did show you some photos. I believe this is from Darren Kuyu, but let's actually read a little bit about that so that you can see just how fortified this place was. The underground city at Darren Kuyu could be closed from the inside with large rolling stone doors. Each floor could be closed off separately. The city could accommodate up to 20,000 people and had amenities found in other underground complexes across Cappadocia. Now, I want to go back to where it says that each floor could be closed off separately. It kind of makes me think of the Titanic in the movie. I don't know much about the actual history of it. I know that it's fishy. But anyway, if you think about the movie, they were closing off different sections of the Titanic as it was sinking to keep the water from getting in certain areas. And that is the first thing that I thought of when I read that each floor could be closed off separately, because that certainly could be something that could keep out a huge wall of water that was coming in, especially again if you combine it with the sort of technology that I definitely believe that they had at that time. Now, a lot of times about Darren Kuyu, they say that they believe that it was built for them to thwart their enemies, but something this big, I don't know. I think that it may have been built specifically to escape the flood, especially considering that 20,000 people could fit in there. And how long did Noah have to build the ark? 100 years, I believe. And yeah, could they have spent 100 years building this, getting this ready for them to escape? I think it's possible. And I don't think that we should underestimate what they were able to do. And then, even if we think about the different stories of these different beings that were said to be coming out of the ground, is this a place that they could have been already? I'm actually going to go back to here where it says, this is Genesis, let me see, sorry, Genesis 6, okay? Oh, sorry, we're in Genesis 7 now. Verse 4, 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. Face of the earth to me at least leaves a possibility that the underground may have been not touched. I do know that there is another part of this passage that also says the face of the earth. So, and actually, if we even go back to that first verse that I showed you, where it actually says there were giants in the earth in those days. Is that a hint? I don't know, because not all versions of the Bible say that. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't take the time to go and see what the Hebrew said. Maybe I should do that right now. Okay, so when you actually go back and look at the Hebrew, it does look like the Hebrew says on the earth. If you are to, I don't know Hebrew. It'll probably be helpful for me to know Hebrew, but I do not. But it does say on the earth here. But I still do find it interesting that it says in the earth, and it doesn't, just discount for the fact that it does say the face of the earth, and multiple times, I believe in the book of Genesis and in other places, the Bible refers to in the earth and on the earth. So they are definitely two different things, biblically speaking. And besides that, we have the story, and I've talked about this in a few other videos, the legend of the Kandahar Giant. And in this legend, it says that a unit, and this is in Afghanistan, came across a cave with scattered army equipment around, but no sign of the missing soldiers, and that's when they chanced upon the Kandahar Giant. So it actually came out of a cave. And you might think, okay, well, that's a fluke, maybe that doesn't always happen, but it actually, you hear of this sort of tale rather often. Here we have the story of the Lovelock giants. They were trapped inside a cave by the Paiutes, and they called these giants the Sitika. And it says that they were trapped in the cave. So at first I thought, okay, well, they just went in there for refuge. However, if you read this, you find out that there were a lot of artifacts that would, at least if they were not living in the cave, that it was certainly a place that they frequented. And I'm thinking, could it be because it was an entrance to an underground place where they were living? So here it says, Alfred Kroeber, founder of the University of California Anthropology Department, was contacted by Hart and Pugh when they reported finding prehistoric artifacts. This spurred the first archaeologic dig of Lovelock in 1912. A second dig took place in 1924, and after finishing the excavations, Loud collaborated on a report that was published in 1929. And what Loud found was nothing short of amazing. Approximately 10,000 archaeological specimens were uncovered, including tools, bones, baskets, and weapons. So if this was a place that they fled to in a hurry, I don't think that they would have all of those items in there with them. I think that it's definitely a place that they were frequenting. Next, we have the story of the ant people of the Hopi, and this is also something that I have talked about in some of my other videos, but it goes on to talk about these ant people who helped the Hopi Indians escape into subterranean caves during some disasters. So we'll just read right here. One of the most intriguing Hopi legends involves the ant people, who were crucial to the survival of the Hopi not just once but twice. The so-called First World or World Age was apparently destroyed by fire, possibly some sort of volcanism, asteroid strike, or coronal mass ejection. I don't believe any of those, but well, yeah. Anyway, the Second World was destroyed by ice age, glaciers, or a pole shift. During these two global cataclysms, the virtuous members of the Hopi tribe were guided by an odd-shaped cloud during the day and a moving star at night. Sound familiar? That led them to the sky god named Sotuknang, who finally took them to the ant people in Hopi Anu Sinam. The ant people then escorted the Hopi into subterranean caves where they found refuge and sustenance. And yeah, stories of the underground and of underground civilizations, they abound. So I definitely believe that there is still a huge possibility that this could be one of the means that the giants were able to live on. Now, this next option I was actually introduced to by someone who commented on one of my other videos and told me that it is in Jewish tradition that Og of Bashan actually stowed away on Noah's Ark, and that is how he survived. And so as I was searching it today, I happened to come across this children's book. That is called Og's Ark, not Noah's Ark, Og's Ark. And it is Carben Publishing, iconic children's books reflecting the rich cultural diversity of today's Jewish families. And so what is Og's Ark about? Well, poor Og the giant, because apparently they don't believe that they're bad, is so big that no bed is large enough to hold him, and he never gets a good night's sleep. Then Noah asks for Og's help, and Og's life changes forever. So, yeah, I guess that's an option if you think that it's possible that there could have been a stowaway. I don't know. That's something that I don't know a whole lot about, but I certainly did find it very, very interesting that there's actually children's books written about this, apparently. Next, the next one is the idea, and this is actually where Rob Skiba used to lean, was that it is possible that Noah's wife and daughters-in-law may have had tainted DNA, that they may have had some Nephilim blood somewhere back in their ancestry. I do find it very interesting that Genesis 6:9, I think it was 6:9, I should probably check, yeah. Genesis 6:9 tells us, "These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God." And this is one of those times where I think that the King James version of the Bible definitely gives a clearer picture of what it is actually trying to say, because most of them say that he was a righteous man and blameless in his generation. And to me, it makes it sound like he was perfect. But we know that there was never any perfect human, only Jesus was perfect. Jesus is perfect. So, what exactly does that mean? And then we see this, and perfect in his generations. And to me, I find it very interesting because it only says that Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. And for some reason, I always thought that his sons were also perfect in their generations. And what does perfect in their generations mean? Well, a lot of us believe that that means that he did not have Nephilim DNA. They were procreating so rapidly with so many people. It was probably very, very hard for them to find anyone who did not have some sort of Nephilim DNA in them at that point. Yet Noah's line, up until Noah, was able to keep that out of their bloodline. Now, but what you will see here is that it says that Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. It does not say that his sons were. It does not say that his wife was or that his sons' wives were. So you have to think to yourself, is it possible that Noah's wife may have had some DNA from the Nephilim in her blood? She may have passed it on to her sons. Is it possible also maybe that the wives may have had some? and that is how the giant DNA may have continued on after the flood. It could have been a recessive gene, something that didn't come out, in every child. And we know that Nimrod is referred to as Gibborim. So that is also associated with the mighty men, and some will also associate them with the giants. So that is another question. I think it's another possibility because it only says that Noah was perfect in his generations. It does not say that anyone else was. So the last choice or the last option that I'm going to go over with you today is kind of it's similar to them escaping to the underground, but this is them escaping to what we might call the other world, as the Tua De Danann call it, or some people just believe it's another dimension. But if they had all of this technology from their fathers, they certainly may have known of portals that could have been used to escape the flood, that would have taken them not only underground, but possibly to another dimension. And, we do know that there is another dimension because angelic beings do not live in our dimension. They live somewhere else. So this is an illustration from C.S. Lewis's The Magician's Nephew, the first book in the Chronicles of Narnia series. And in that book, it talks about all these different puddles that take them to all of these different worlds. And water is actually very popular when it comes to talking about portals. Found it very interesting because C.S. Lewis, even though is known as a Christian writer, he was an adept. He was trained in a lot of the esoteric knowledge that most people don't know, and yet he seemed to talk about stuff like this all the time. I could I could do a whole series on all the stuff I'm finding in The Magician's Nephew. But is it possible that they knew of some way to escape what we might call this realm and go to another one? And this is known as a she. And the Shi is also another name for the fairy folk in Ireland, but it's also the name for these fairy mounds. And they were known to be portals to the underworld, according to Irish folklore and to some other Celtic folklore. Um, and right here, this is supposed to be um, the Tua De Danann in the other world. It kind of gives an underground effect. So some people believe that the other world may just also be underground, but it also could be another realm possibility because we have all these other stories of elves and fairies and gnomes, going to these other realms through these she's, through these fairy rings, through these fairy mounds, and yeah, sometimes even through what some people might call stargates. You know, there are so many choices. And from my last video, not my last video, 2 videos ago, I did talk about how the fairies and elves they were very likely Nephilim. That's what they were. There's just different names for the Nephilim. And it talks about them escaping to this other world. So, is it possible that this is all tied together? I don't know, but those are all the ideas that I came up with. If you have any other ideas or if you'd like to elaborate on anything that I talked about today, I would love to hear from you. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.